Anderson Silva. On Saturday, he fought Uriah Hall, 45 years old. Looked good early on, eventually loses in the 4th round via TKO. And for the second straight week, we have an emotional UFC main event where there's crying involved and there's hugs and there's all kinds of, liquids coming out of people. I mean, it was a very, very, emotional scene afterwards. And even the post-fight interview, I wanted to...
Sometimes I try to ignore it, but I can't.
I bet mucus and tears and some liquids. What are you talking about? Anyway,
the fact that you even say it, I'm trying to ignore it. I'm like, the last 2 weeks in a row, we've had emotional fights. There's liquids coming out of people. Like, what?
You know what I mean? Like right now, I have tears going.
This is crazy, dog. I was like, I tried to keep a straight face, but could not. I was like, oh my goodness.
Anyway, what did you make of
oh my goodness.
What did you make of the whole scene on Saturday with Anderson? It was very emotional. It was very sad.
I was emotional on Saturday morning. Like when I woke up, I was like, man, it's been like a rough year it's been a rough year. Think about this. 2020. You have Habib, myself, Anderson, and Henry Cejudo. So looking at Anderson and knowing going in there, he's saying it's going to be the end of his UFC career. It makes you kind of sad because for Anderson Silva was the guy, honestly, that made me go, wow, this dude's different. He's different, and I talked about this last week where I said I was in Philadelphia, but it's like, he just was almost like a rock star, and everybody in the world knew Anderson Silva. So for his time to be done in this thing was very sad. And then to see him losing the way that he did was awful. But I've always said this, even when I had this retirement date of 40 years old, I was like, most of our heroes, how do they go out? How do they go out? On their back, right? And unfortunately, Anderson, again, now he's one of those guys too. He has to go out on the loss like that unless somehow he finds a place to fight and he recreates one more memory so we don't have to remember him being knocked out by Uriah Hall. It was sad to see him like that. But once again, one of our heroes goes out in the same way that most of them do.
So here's the thing. He does have one fight left on his UFC deal, but it seems very clear they've decided to part ways. Now, he said this was my final day in the UFC, but he stopped short at saying, I'm done. Even in a subsequent Instagram post on Sunday, still didn't say this is it for me. There's two big differences between his story and the ones that you just mentioned, you, Cejudo, Habib. You guys, I know you lost to Stipe, but you went out on top, right? Like you're fighting for the belt. It was a decision. It was a close fight. Cejudo won. Habib won. His is different, right? He hasn't won, a real decisive victory. He hasn't had one of those since 2012 when he beat Stephan Bonner, believe it or not. But DC, it is worth noting this. These are his last fights. Uriah Hall. Okay.
Fights everybody hard.
Number 10, Uriah Hall. Prior to that, Jared Cannonier got injured. Okay, but Cannonier was fighting in a number 1 contender fight. Izzy, prior to that, beats Derek Brunson. Close fight. Some people thought he lost, but still Brunson was highly ranked. DC on 3 days' notice. Michael Bisping, super close fight. Nick Diaz won, but then turned to a no contest. And then the 2 Weidman fights. He's not fighting bums, and he's not getting embarrassed. And by the way, enough isn't made of this, DC. In 2013, I remember it vividly. When he broke his leg against Chris Weidman, we thought he was done then. The guy lasted 7 more years after that, right?
It's amazing. Fought the best of the best. The best of the best. So that's the thing, right? Anderson is Anderson. And it's like, when you're a legend like that, if I decide to go back and fight, say I want to fight again, I wouldn't get some random dude. I'd get the best guys in the division. It's like, you don't get those types of fights. Even if you aren't the person that you were before, you still have to fight at that level. Because what is it to put Anderson Silva in there with a new guy? It doesn't work. He will always get those fights unless he goes somewhere else. And, we make so much money. It's like you got to justify the fight being in a big enough spot for us to be taking up so much of the budget for these fight cards. He doesn't get easy fights, and he never will. But like you said earlier, we're all fighting for championships, and he's fighting on a fight night, against one of the highest ranked guys in the world. But it's like, this is Anderson Silva. This guy was a rock star at one point, and you would hope that at 45, this is it. But I thought McGregor had a really interesting post about the fight. He was like, we don't know what's in a person's heart in terms of competition. Go find someone. And I think he alluded to finding the right type of fights for Anderson at 45, because they are out there, right? There are guys fighting out there that he can compete with. Unfortunately, he cannot compete at the level that's expected in the UFC right now. So it's going to be on him to decide what he wants to do, and on the UFC to allow him to go and pursue that. Because Conor was kind of right. It's like, you don't tell, if a guy has it in his heart to compete, then I guess he gets to compete.
What would you like to see him do?
I'd like to see him stop. I'd like to see him stop, if I'm being honest. Because if he goes and fights somewhere else, it's like he's fighting somewhere else now. When everything that we have come to learn about Anderson and everything that the spider was UFC related. Mm-hmm. And I always think that as our legends go on and they get done and they go to other organizations, I think it changes things a little bit. Like Fedor never came to the UFC. So all the Fedor intrigue was always surrounding. So it doesn't matter if he goes to Bellator, Strikeforce, Ryzen, Sengoku, all the things that he fought in. It didn't matter, right? That was what he did. Pride, M1 Global. It didn't matter. It was never in the UFC. I think Anderson is so tied to the organization that you want to see his fights there. And then when it's done, be done there, like not somewhere else.
Selfishly, I'd like for him to stop. I hope he's not fighting for money. I hope he's made enough money and, more importantly, invested his money the right way. You hope that these fighters, especially the legends, aren't sticking around because they feel like they don't have enough money or didn't, spend their money the right way. But here's the biggest. I'm happy you brought up Fyodor Emelianenko. I'm happy you mentioned him. It's actually Fyodor. That's what the Russian fans tell me.
You're Michael Chiesa now. You want to correct my pronunciation? I got a friend that pronounces better than you, John Anik. So
that's right.
John pronounces better than you. So it's like everybody has somebody better. So chill.
Anik is the GOAT when it comes to pronunciations. There's no doubt about that. But here's the thing. Remember, Fyodor was getting knocked out in like 45 seconds by Hendo. He was getting knocked out by Ryan Bader. It was getting sad with Fyodor, right? With Anderson, it's still not happening. Do you see? Beginning of that fight, he's winning. He's looking pretty darn good for a 45-year-old. So I don't feel like he's done. I feel like he's going to look at the beginning of that fight, rightly or wrongly, and say, I still got some left in me. Maybe I'll go to Bellator. Maybe I'll call old Chael P and run it back for a third time. There are fights left out for him, and I feel like he's going to stick around.
Bro, but that's the thing. That's what we do. I talked to you about this with us. You squint, and you go, oh, man, I remember that guy that held up 2 championships. I remember that guy that beat these dudes and went through the fires. I remember when Anderson looks at himself, he goes, I remember what I did to Chris Lieben and Rich Franklin. And that guy I saw early looks like him. But then as time goes, bro, I don't like to agree with Jones. But I saw a tweet from the night of my fight. He goes, wow, as the fight has gone on, look at DC's boxing defense kind of slip. Right? It's like, that's what happens as you get older. That right hand that landed would not have hit Anderson back in the day. It just wouldn't have.
Yeah.
Right? And if it did, it wouldn't have floored him. I hit him hard. So maybe Uriah Hall just hits a lot harder than the guys that hit him prior. But he would have seen that. And you're right. He will look at it and go, oh, man, I was doing really good. Because that's what you do as an athlete. Right? Drew Brees doesn't throw the ball downfield as much as he used to. Because he can't. Even though he's great and he still is accurate. He chooses the safe throw. Because he doesn't want to take the risk of doing it down the field. But when he does, occasionally, he probably goes, you know what? I can still get the ball down there. And it's like, that's what you do as a high-level athlete. And I think Anderson's going to do that. And I don't know if that's the case. But you're right. There are fights out there, Chael. But will Chael fight? Chael doesn't seem to want to fight.
I was just kidding about that. But I will say
that, like, there are guys.
There are guys.
But do you want to see him fighting in Bellator or in ONE FC? Like,
I don't know. I want to be very clear. I hope he stops. 45, like, you shouldn't be fighting at 45.
I mean,
with all
45 years old going into an octagon fighting is crazy.
Yeah, no. I hope he stops. Truly, I hope he stops. I just don't know if he'll stop is what I'm saying. I don't believe that he's done. I believe that the reason why he is being sort of vague about all of this is because he wants
to continue to do it. He's uncertain about something. There's some uncertainty in him somewhere that doesn't allow him to be definitive about him being done. Look, man, the only person, not many people get to do it that long. Tom Brady's doing it right now, which is absurd.
Yeah.
Breeze at 41 is still playing really well. The second greatest basketball player of all time, Michael Jordan, averaged 20 points a game at 40 years old. Like, certain guys can do it, but it's not for everybody. And for Anderson to have competed at the level that he's competed at for so long and still in main events at 45 should be enough.
Yeah, and how dare you say that? I heard what you said about
Wait, what?
How dare you say that? Unless you're talking about like Wilt or Bill Russell, how dare you? How dare you say that about MJ? I mean, really?
I just gave him props. He averaged 20 points a game at 40.
Kid,
like, that's
like the 70s, 80s, 90s should not be talking about MJ like that. Like, that's just sacrilege.
No, I'm saying MJ.
Yes, I know, but you said second greatest of all time.
Well, he is. LeBron James is the greatest basketball player of all time. We had this discussion off air. We had discussion at the beginning of the quarantine. I told you didn't want to listen, but now you have finally come to realize that the discussion needs to be had. But not many guys get to do it that good, and Anderson did.
True or false? Do you hurt your legacy as a fighter? Because let's be honest, everyone wants to go out like Khabib did, right? And we'll get to Khabib, of course, later on.
I chased that.
Yeah,
I chased it.
Yeah, you did. And I'll still, I mean, you didn't get that last victory, but I mean, you're fighting for the belt. How many people fight for the belt in their retirement fight? But that's fair. Everyone wants to go out like GSP did, right?
Yes.
Madison Square Garden. Do you hurt your legacy? Because I would argue BJ Penn severely hurt his legacy. I would argue Fyodor hurt his legacy. I'll argue that Anderson is hurting his legacy. And we're not even talking about the PEDs. Do you hurt your legacy when at the end of the day, there's 8 straight losses on the, because I think there are people watching right now who are like, what's the big deal about Anderson Silva? They don't remember that guy anymore. That's sad.
You're right. Hey, you're right, Ariel. Man, dude, you're on point today. Like, you really had this discussion. You really went like and thought about this discussion. You're right. You're absolutely right. Because when these young kids, I saw something the other day. I don't know what it was on Twitter, but it caught my eye, right? And all the mentions, some catches your eye. And some kids were talking about, it was Anderson, about the fight. I put that picture of him and I hugging. And these kids were talking about, I didn't even know DC and Anderson fought.
Oh, geez.
But then they're like, the big deal about Anderson and this dude, the kid's like, I didn't know this. And the guy's like, no, that was like 4 or 5 years ago. That a kid was like, well, I'm 21 now. He's like, I was like 14. And I really kind of got into the sport a couple years ago, or a few years ago. But if he didn't remember that from 16, he has no idea. Right. 2009, 10, 11. So when he sees a 45-year-old man walking out there, he sees all these highlights and goes, wow. But that Anderson from then was never a part of his real reality. So all he knows of Anderson Silva is getting beat by Uriah Hall, which Uriah Hall is a good fighter. But you and I both know that 10 years ago, he was not beating Anderson Silva.
No. Right?
So it's like, that's the thing. You're losing fights to guys that you would not have lost to in your prime, and it would not have been close. And I'm not even, Uriah Hall is a good fighter. Most guys are. But it was proven you couldn't beat Anderson Silva. Nobody did. So it's not a knock on him. Nobody beat Anderson Silva. Nobody beat Fedor. Fedor was unbeatable. But then you watch him get knocked out by Ryan Bader. Like Ryan Bader. Or you see him get beaten. Who beat him in 10 seconds? Was it Matt Mitrione or something like that?
No, that was a little different. That was not that short, but Hendo.
Yeah, Dan Henderson knocked him out. But that's fine. Like, that's Dan Henderson, right? Dan could knock anybody out. And you never know if back in the day, Dan could have competed with Fedor, because Dan in Pride was the man, right? Yeah. Double champ, all that. But didn't he lose to Matt Mitrione too?
He did, but it wasn't 10 seconds. But yes, he did lose in the first round. It was a crazy double knockdown. And
right. So would he have lost to Matt Mitrione back in the day?
Right. Yeah.
It's like all these, you're losing to these guys, and these guys are taking these losses with them, and there's wins with them, these victories over these legends, and it's actually really sad.
Yeah, it's a crazy thing in the fight game, how quickly things move along. I was talking to a couple of neighbors of mine, Dash and Ben. These guys are huge MMA fans. They love the show, so shout out to them. And they're like, oh, what's the big deal about this guy? They're early 20s, mid-teens. And I'm trying to explain to them, like, Forrest Griffin. I'm trying to explain to them Vitor Belfort and Okami fight and all this stuff. But, the sport evolves. There's so much going on. I have to say, though, it was sad. And then the ending was heartwarming. And you have Uriah Hall there apologizing to the guy. What a moment that was, apologizing to him. And I understand why he was apologizing. I hope that didn't affect his actual game plan, because sometimes we've seen, people fight others who they look up to. I think of Pat Barry and Mirko Cro Cop, and they're like a little gun shy. But that was just kind of a surreal scene. Like, in what other sport do you see that? It was almost, what it was, reminiscent. And shout out to my guy Jedi Goodman for bringing this up. It was Shawn Michaels and Ric Flair. Like, he's crying. He didn't want to kill him, right? And it was exactly that moment in real life. Remember that? Yeah,
Hey,
it was that.
Goes, boom, super kick right to the side of the face. Beautiful. It was, he took dude, heartbreaking. I was watching that match with Ric Flair and going, oh my God, he's going to make Ric Flair retire. Even though they've had so many retirement matches, right? Yeah. Like, it was like, this is the one, because Shawn Michaels did it so well, bro. Watching Uriah Hall weeping in the octagon afterwards, like in his corner, like on his knees. It was a powerful moment in the sense also because of who we thought Uriah Hall was going to be when he left the Ultimate Fighter. So it was almost like the perfect way if you have to go out on a loss, right? Lost to the guy that everybody thought was going to be you. Lost to the guy that everybody thought it was so closely, you guys were so similar. I don't know if it's a better way, but you're right. Like, there was a lot of honor in that. In Uriah Hall, you could see that it was real. You could see that Uriah Hall meant everything when he was as he was speaking to Anderson. But again, it's just a hard thing to see our idols get carted off like that. And I'm not technically, but like Anderson Silva, he's gone.
Yeah.
But the reality is, like, honestly, like, if I'm being honest, man, like, you as an athlete, especially a fighter with the mentality, man, love the gesture from Uriah. But if you're Anderson Silva's thinking to himself, man, thank you, but I don't necessarily need it. Kick my dead corpse off to the side and just move me out of the way, right? Don't weep for me, right? Don't weep for me. I'm a fighter. I'm going to get through this, because I know that if that would have happened to me, if Stipe would have knocked me out, man, throw my corpse off the side of a bridge somewhere and let me move on. I don't need to be honored in that way in terms of from the competition. It's just a fighter's mentality. And I'm sure Anderson appreciated it, but in hindsight will be like, forget this, man. Like, just throw me out to the river, throw me out the pasture.